they went off. She said I could turn mine off if I wanted to, but no, I'm going to stay on. And so
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining today's call. As always, we have a very large call planned, many people joining. So I'm going to give it a minute or two to allow more people to join before we get started. Thanks for being here. Hi, everybody. Thanks for joining today's call. We have a very large call today. We have about 600 people already on. We're expecting about twice as many people to join today. So I'm going to give it another minute or so before I get started. Thanks for your patience. Okay, hello and welcome. Thank you so much for joining today's National Weekly Call and the launch of our campaign, HoUSed, for universal, stable, affordable housing. I'm Diane Yantel. I am President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition, and I'm thrilled to have nearly 1,500 people registered to join today's call from all over the country. We're joined today, as we are every week, by so many people who are directly impacted by housing instability and homelessness, people who are experiencing homelessness, renters, resident leaders, organizers. We're joined by local, state, and national partners and congressional champions, and all of you will be key to this campaign's success of advancing anti-racist policies and the large-scale sustained investments and reforms that are needed to ensure that renters with the lowest incomes have an affordable and accessible place to call home. So it's been now just over a year, almost to the day, since we began these weekly national calls to mobilize for solutions to keep the lowest income renters and unhoused people safe and healthy and housed during the pandemic. And every week for a year, over 1,000 of you, representing nearly 2,300 organizations, have regularly joined us in this work. Early in the pandemic, we worked together to get resources for addressing the urgent needs of people experiencing homelessness and to get a limited federal eviction moratorium put in place. After the passage of the CARES Act, we launched, led, and mobilized around our demand for rent relief now, calling for a broad national eviction moratorium and emergency rental assistance. And our collective advocacy and the work of extraordinary congressional champions like Chairwoman Maxine Waters and Senator Sherrod Brown was successful. We achieved a national eviction moratorium, which, while flawed, has kept tens of millions of renters stably housed during the pandemic. We were successful in getting that moratorium implemented by a Republican president, extended by a bipartisan Congress, and further extended by President Biden. And of course, we are urging him to, again, further extend, strengthen, and enforce the moratorium. And we were successful in getting Congress to provide a combined $46.5 billion in emergency rental assistance, just an unprecedented amount of funds to address the rent and utility arrears that have accrued during the pandemic. And there was more. Thanks to our congressional champions, Congress provided additional assistance to address homelessness and provide some long-term housing stability with emergency housing vouchers. And all told, our collective efforts achieved almost $87 billion in housing and homelessness resources during the pandemic. Truly remarkable. But clearly, we are not done. We have much more work to do. we have a tremendous obligation now to ensure that these historic resources reach the lowest income and most marginalized people, Black, Indigenous, and people of color, the LGBTQ community, survivors of domestic violence, people involved with the criminal legal system, and more. We have to ensure that these funds reach those with the greatest needs in time to prevent more evictions and, in worst cases, homelessness. And we'll have much more to say about this work of implementing emergency rental assistance in the weeks and months to come. And now we need to build on our success, keep this momentum going, and address and resolve the underlying housing crisis and systemic racism that brought us to the brink of an eviction tsunami during a pandemic. We have to build off of our successful advocacy and achieve the anti-racist policies and significant sustained investments to end homelessness and housing poverty once and for all. And we have an extraordinary moment of opportunity. It's at least a once in a generation opportunity, and maybe it's once in a lifetime. And it's right now. It's in the next 6 to 9 months. This is the moment that we have been waiting for, and we're ready. We have a strengthened, expanded, and incredibly effective movement for housing justice. We have a president who, unlike any president before him, recognizes housing as a human right and has called for universal housing vouchers and major investments in affordable housing. We have Democrats in Congress who intend to be bold and go big with their majority. We have incredible congressional champions in positions of power, ready to lead the fight for housing solutions as they have for so long. And we built strong bipartisan support for some of our solutions as well. So this is the moment that we've been waiting for. And we will seize it together with all of you through our HoUSed campaign for universal, stable, and affordable housing. And we'll talk today about the solutions, the 4 sets of solutions that we will be working to achieve to end homelessness and housing poverty. And we'll talk too about how the solutions are not only major investments, but also about essential anti-racist policies and reforms to ensure that the investments work for the Black, Indigenous, and people of color who are so disproportionately harmed by our inequitable by design housing system. And the solutions that we're talking about, we are incredibly fortunate to already have strong champions for them on Capitol Hill. And none are more committed or more effective than Representative Maxine Waters, chair of the House Financial Services Committee, who joins us now and who I'm so honored and delighted to introduce. So Chairwoman Waters, I want to thank you. I want to welcome you back to the call and thank you for joining us. And I want to thank you for your incredible leadership in 2020 in ensuring that Congress provided such historic resources to address housing and homelessness during the pandemic. Your leadership and your commitment to ending homelessness and housing poverty is unparalleled. And we are so grateful for your tireless dedication to assist renters and unhoused people. We're looking forward to your continued leadership to enact your Housing is Infrastructure Act and so much more. And we are ready to mobilize and fight with you. So thank you again for joining us, Congresswoman Waters, and I'll turn it to you for your remarks.
Thank you for that very generous introduction. And I am very pleased and appreciative for being with you today. And I want to thank you for having me back on this call, and especially to you, Diane Yentl, President and CEO of the National Low Income Housing Coalition. You are a absolutely fantastic leader. And I appreciate not only the leadership that you're providing, but the fact that your advocacy has indeed inspired a lot of people, a lot of members, and we have a great support base for housing in the Congress of the United States, particularly Democrats. And so the National Low Income Housing Coalition does such important work on behalf of the nation's lowest income families. So to all of the members of the coalition, I'd like to convey how appreciative I am for your work during this pandemic crisis. You've really made a difference, and I'm pleased that President Biden and his administration are providing real leadership and delivering the assistance and relief that individuals, families, and communities across the country so badly need. With the passage of the American Rescue Plan into law, critical housing assistance is certainly on the way. As chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, I've been sounding the alarm about the need for emergency rental assistance since the beginning of this pandemic crisis. The American Rescue Plan includes essential funding for emergency rental assistance, providing $21.5 billion to pay the back rent and future rent payments owed by millions of struggling families. Combined with the funding for emergency rental assistance I negotiated in December stimulus package and the $5 billion for 70,000 new housing vouchers that are included in this package, this bill is truly historic and will help people across the nation to remain safely housed. I'm encouraged by reports that the CDC will extend its eviction moratorium, which will give communities time to distribute rental assistance funds. However, it is important that we remain vigilant and work to ensure grantees are properly implementing the program so that renters are stabilized and landlords, particularly the small mom and pop landlords, are made whole. We have worked so hard to secure this funding. We now need to make sure the program is a success. So I'm very pleased that the bill provides a $5 billion for homeless assistance to enable state and local governments to provide shelter that facilitates social distancing and supportive services for the hundreds of thousands of people currently experiencing homelessness. So as many of you know, HUD just reported that homelessness increased in the United States for the 4th year in a row, and this increase doesn't even take into account the impacts of the pandemic. The funding we have provided will be critical to helping our neighbors experiencing homelessness achieve housing stability. While we have achieved so much through the American Rescue Plan, there's much more work to be done. I will be working to make sure the relief in the American Rescue Plan is distributed equitably. And as Congress and the Biden administration turn to infrastructure, I'm committed to ensuring that housing is a very key part of any infrastructure package. Previously, my bill, the Housing is Infrastructure Act, was part of the Moving Forward Act, House Democrats' infrastructure package, which we passed through the House last year. The bill included $100 billion in critical funding for our nation's affordable housing infrastructure to create or preserve approximately 1.8 million affordable homes. I plan to reintroduce this bill with important updates that reflect the growing need for housing in the wake of the coronavirus pandemic. Now, with the Biden administration providing this strong leadership and Democrats in control of the House and the Senate, I'm very hopeful that we will be able to make critical investments in affordable housing as part of an infrastructure bill. So I want to thank you for all of your work in support of affordable housing for our nation's lowest income families. I have to tell you that before our committee today, we had a hearing, and we had a hearing as a result of what was indicated in the CARES Act, where both the Fed and indeed the Treasury Secretary, Fed Director and the Treasury Secretary had to come before us and give us a report. And so I took the time that I had to speak with Janet Yellen about the guidelines that they are developing, have developed, and told her how worried I am about the confusion that I think many of our renters are facing for so many reasons. One reason is that cities have their moratorium programs, states have their moratorium programs, and of course there's the federal moratorium program. And I don't think that, the average renter would know and understand what that means and whether or not, some of the local moratoriums will, last very much longer, or whether or not they have come to an end. And of course, we know what's happening with the federal moratorium program, and we hope that it's extended until we can get our act together on making sure that we have the rules and the guidelines by which to do this rental assistance. I did learn that in the guidelines that states have a lot of flexibility. And in California, I was a little bit disturbed that, as I understand it, the guidelines that have been used will allow them to not do 100% rental assistance, and that the legislature quickly passed legislation that would only support 80%. And there's other flexibility that causes me some concern. And so, having just gotten this information about what's happening in California, I am arranging a call with Governor Newsom today to talk about what was passed and what I think may be problematic, and getting the support that is needed by our renters. And so we still have work to do. Yes, we've gotten substantial money, but now the implementation and the flexibility the states have may be a real problem for us, and it may provide, opportunities, even though unwittingly, for landlords to be evicting people unless the moratorium is going to protect them. So I'm concerned, and I will be working on this every day until I'm able to help move this rental assistance, and certainly starting right here in California, but all over the country. We need to understand this flexibility and what states are doing, and how they are implementing, the rental assistance program. So with that, again, I want to thank you for getting us to this point and helping us to get rental assistance in the way that it is now, included in the rescue plan, but implementation now is a challenge that we've got to deal with. So thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you, Chairwoman Waters. Do you have time for a question, or
Yes,
are you?
I do. Yes.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. And we share your concerns. Absolutely. I would be glad to share with you what we've been learning about where the emergency rental assistance funds are working and where they're not, and what we think needs to happen to ensure that money gets used by the people who need it the most.
And I'll be happy to hear if you want to share that information with me now or later, however you want to do it. I'd be happy to hear what you're learning also about the implementation.
Wonderful. Yeah, we'll be happy we'll follow up with you and your staff to share everything we know. We've been tracking all of the emergency rental assistance programs and have put together some analysis of places where it's working and where it's not, and what needs to be improved. I would love if you could, while we have a few more minutes with you, if you could talk a little bit more about your Housing as Infrastructure Act and what priorities you have going into the infrastructure package, and what housing investments you think are possible to achieve in that next big bill.
Oh, okay. Well, I think that housing is infrastructure, is legislation that gives us an opportunity to deal with not only what has been caused by COVID, but also, the problems that we've had for such a long time in providing safe and secure housing for low income and people who need affordable housing. And so the bill would include any number of things, and I'm probably going to miss some of it right now, but top of mind is the fact that we're going to take care of public housing, and we're going to make sure that the capital costs that have been denied for so long for the upkeep of public housing is in this bill. All of our public housing units across the country, many of them rather, are in disrepair. And up in New York with NYCHA, it is just a huge, huge problem. But we're going to make sure that public housing is included. Then, of course, I'm really keen on the development of affordable rental units. I'm really, really wanting the Housing Trust Fund to be funded in ways that will attract, developers of low and moderate income housing to want to really be involved. And I've been talking with the cities and some of the mayors, and we'll continue to talk about how they can be instrumental in helping to keep affordable housing affordable. Sometimes with our cities, when they tack on all kinds of things, they increase the cost, and affordable housing is no longer affordable. And so working with them for one-stop shops where they expedite permits and licensing, and all of that needs to be paid attention to. And of course, we need to know more about requests that are made, not requests, but mandates of some of our cities about moving, poles, fire hydrants, a lot of stuff that the city should be doing in order to accommodate low-income housing. They place it on the developers, and that increased the cost. And that's why, affordable housing ends up not being as affordable as it should be. So those are some of the areas that I'm very, very focused on in housing is infrastructure that I can recall right now. And that is public housing and the development of housing rental units. We have some other stuff in there also for home ownership. And there's some things that I'm focusing on that I don't have in there yet, but I'm really, really thinking about what we do to help people with being able to pay down payments, which on homes that they can afford because of their income would allow them to take care of monthly mortgages. But getting this down payment is a real obstacle to many people with home ownership that really can afford to have home ownership. So I'm looking at that and some other things that that I think are very important to assisting in getting people into safe and secure housing.
Wonderful. Well, we strongly support your efforts and your bill, and we're behind you. And maybe I know you're just about out of time, and you've been so generous with your time. But if you have any guidance for us, direction for us about how you think our network, all 1,000 people on this call and beyond, can help advocate to ensure that the housing as infrastructure is enacted this year, we would love your thoughts and guidance.
Well, of course, your advocacy is well felt in the Congress of the United States, and you do a good job with that. But the only thing that I can say about that is to be tough and to absolutely make it understood among your friends who are members and those who are not friendly, that we're not going away with an infrastructure bill that does not include housing. Now, the latest that I heard, Biden is putting together the infrastructure bill as he sees it. And I understand he's being very generous to housing. I understand he is maybe doubling what we had been talking about originally. And so I will be following up on that information that I just received today. But I'm very pleased to hear that he's taking it very seriously. And if it's true that he's doubling what we have been thinking about, we're just going to shout for joy. And we need to let him know in 101 ways, no, 10,001 ways that we're appreciative if his rollout includes $200 billion
right
in housing. Okay.
Incredible. Yes, we will certainly be ready to cheer from the rafters if that's the case, and
Okay,
push it
so
across.
being tough, being consistent, doing what you do, ensuring that the members and their staffs, are getting all of the written material that you're sending. And then, of course, with COVID, it is so difficult to organize in some of the ways that, we've done in the past. But let's look forward to COVID ending and, being a lot better. That may give us an opportunity to have to show up. And if the opportunity presents itself and COVID is in such a situation that the experts tell us that it is safe to do so, we should make that a part of our advocacy and show up. Okay?
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Chairwoman Waters. Thank you again for your tremendous leadership in 2020 and always. And thanks in advance for the fights ahead. We've got your back. We're really excited to advocate for the legislation that you are championing and leading. And thank you for joining the call again today.
You're welcome. Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.
All right.
Okay, so what a wonderful boost to have one of the leading champions, if not the leading champion in Congress, for the solutions that we will be advocating for in this campaign on the line. So Thanks again to Congresswoman Waters and to her staff for helping make that happen. And now I want to introduce our next speaker, who is Mindy Woods. Mindy is a member of the National Low Income Housing Coalition's Board of Directors, and she's going to talk a little bit about the importance of this campaign. Mindy's a single mom. She's a veteran of the U.S. Navy. She and her son experienced homelessness a couple of times, and during one of her stays at a women's shelter, she was asked to testify in a bill in the state legislature that sparked her passion for advocacy, and she hasn't stopped since. And she's currently a leader of the Resident Action Project in Washington State, and she is a member of NLIHC's Board of Directors. And Mindy, thank you so much for joining, and I'll turn it over to you.
Oh, thank you so much, Diane. I appreciate that. So yes, as Diane said, my name is Mindy Woods, single mom and somebody who has had lived experience with homelessness twice in the last 10 years. And that led me to the Resident Action Project, which is an organization, statewide led organization of people with lived experience with housing injustice across the state of Washington. And we use our stories to influence policy, we do storytelling, organizing, and civic action. And as Diane said, my initial introduction into advocacy was to go down to our state capitol and use my story and talk to a committee of lawmakers and just share with them what it was like for me and what a particular bill meant for my son and myself and our stability. And so we have organized all across the state of Washington to meet with policymakers, both on all on the city level, county levels, as well as state level. And we've obviously known we've had a housing and homelessness crisis before COVID hit, and certainly in the past 14, 15 months, that has only exploded, as we all know. And I have been fortunate enough that during the start of COVID, I actually got a job offer with the city that I live in as a human services program manager. And literally the day that I started my job, before I even signed paperwork to accept the position, I was handed a piece of paper with a list of people already calling for rental assistance. We hadn't even implemented our program yet. We hadn't gotten CARES funding. We just had our city council designate $100,000 to set aside for assistance. And immediately they were handing me this piece of paper and said, help people, create a program and get money out to people. And, going from my own personal experience and then going into, oh my gosh, how do I even, create a program and how do we set this up? I hit the ground running, and that just speaks to the massive crisis that we have on our hands. I have been running ever since. We then were able to get CARES funding, and thank God for that, because we had so many people. We blew through that money so fast, made my head spin. And it just opened my eyes to just how many people are one incident away from a financial crisis that can tailspin them into at least housing insecurity, if not homelessness. And then when people's jobs were tied to their health care, that too became such a inequity for so many of our workforce that are lower wage and predominantly and disproportionately people of color and immigrant status and people with disabilities. And so as the months started to go on, these disparities just became more and more evident. And so for Washington State, we are just now getting our next round of CARES funding. I've been bombarded with phone calls for a week now asking when is the money available. And so it just shows me that we really need to invest in a federal program that, better tenant protections, rental assistance, investing in our housing trust fund, making sure that we have a robust Section 8 program, that we are not patchworking this across the country, that we really have a solid, stable federal program that helps to keep people in their homes, that we have permanent supportive housing. We have vulnerable people that they're going to need those wraparound services on an ongoing basis. And to put somebody into a place and then say, good luck, follow the rules and don't fail is just not realistic. We need those wraparound services. But we really need to build truly affordable housing that people of all income levels have options of housing that they can actually afford. And when, Washington State, we have a minimum wage of $15 that is being proposed, but that we know is not enough. In Washington, we have 68% of our extremely low income renter households are severely cost burdened. So they're making really difficult choices between food and medicine and keeping the power on. We've got, for every 100 affordable low income rentals available, we only, or for 100 people that need those rentals, we only have 31 available units. So that's a lot of people left out trying to figure out where can they stay. And then when you've got, cities with just really crude policies of no sit, no lie, no car camping, no this, no that, we are criminalizing homelessness, yet the problem is growing before our eyes. So a national rental assistance program with better investments in our housing trust fund, like I said, with more federal programming to help have better tenant protections and to have better policies is what we need. So I am really, really hopeful for what Congresswoman Maxine Waters said. I'm looking forward to this program and everybody that is on this call and our other partners out in the community coming together and really having a profound, thoughtful, comprehensive program to keep our most vulnerable housed and safe, and and then with the ability for everybody to be able to thrive and live up to their full potential. So I thank you for inviting me to the call.
Thanks so much, Mindy. I really appreciate you grounding us in why this work is so important and why we so need these solutions and these resources. And I appreciate your leadership. Thank you, Mindy.
Yes, thank you.
So as Mindy mentioned, and we heard some from Chairwoman Maxine Waters, we need more resources and reforms to programs to end homelessness and housing poverty once and for all. And the team will be putting in the chat box links to fact sheets on each of the policy solutions that we are working to achieve through the HoUSed campaign. There are 4 buckets of solutions that include universal voucher assistance for all eligible households, increased supply, which includes preserving what we have today, preserving our public housing stock, building more with the National Housing Trust Fund, and local zoning reform. The third solution is permanent emergency rental assistance, essentially through a national housing stabilization fund. And the fourth set of solutions is really robust renter protections to rebalance the power between landlords and tenants. So I'm really pleased to have a number of our national partners on the call today to talk a little bit more in depth about each of these sets of policy solutions. And I'm going to turn first to Will Fisher from the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, ask him to introduce himself and his organization and talk a little bit about the need for and how we achieve universal rental assistance. So Will, thanks for joining.
Thanks a lot, Diane. So yeah, like Dan said, my name is Will Fisher. I'm with the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities. We're a research organization that focuses on low-income programs that help people with low incomes. And within housing, we especially focus on federal rental assistance programs, including public housing and the Housing Choice Voucher Program. We're grateful to the coalition for leading this campaign, and we're really excited about the moment we're in and the opportunity to push these really ambitious solutions to help people better afford housing. I'm going to be talking specifically about the goal of universal rental assistance and especially about expanding the Housing Choice Voucher Program toward that goal. And this, of all the important items on this agenda, we think is the single most important. The main thing I want to say on the voucher program is we know from lots of research and experience that it works really well, but there's just never been the funding for the program to reach more than a small fraction of people who could benefit from it. And right now we have a better opportunity probably than we've ever had to expand the program to meet a significant part of that unmet need. So I'll talk a little bit more about the benefits of vouchers. So this is the largest federal rental assistance program. It helps more than 2 million households to afford housing, mostly by helping them rent units of their choice in the private market. There's been one rigorous gold standard study after another showing that vouchers are extremely effective at reducing homelessness, housing instability, overcrowding. And because having a stable home is so important, vouchers also have cascading of benefits in other parts of people's lives. So they result in kids bouncing from school to school less frequently. They reduce how many kids are placed in foster care. They cause kids to be less likely to have behavioral problems or sleep problems. So this has a whole range of benefits all throughout people's lives. Vouchers are effective at expanding housing choice for people with disabilities and helping seniors to afford housing. In addition, because people who struggle to afford housing are disproportionately people of color, and problems that vouchers address, like homelessness and housing, also disproportionately affect people of color. Vouchers are potentially a really important tool for addressing racial inequity in this country. So the voucher program is not perfect. There are ways that it could be further improved, and especially to make it easier for low-income families to use vouchers. And there are some items on the campaign agenda that are geared towards that. But the most important limitation on vouchers is there just hasn't been enough funding to provide them to all the people who could benefit from all the benefits that I just talked about. So the funding for the voucher program is capped by the annual appropriations that Congress provides each year. Nearly every dollar that gets appropriated for the program ends up getting used, but it just hasn't been enough. So about vouchers and all other federal rental assistance only reach about 1 in 4 eligible families, and there's long waiting lists almost everywhere in the country. So the most important thing that we need is just more funding to provide vouchers to more people. Like Diane said, President Biden during the campaign proposed a universal voucher program to provide Section 8 vouchers to everyone who's eligible. And we think that should be the goal. And we should be trying to achieve that in a recovery package or in other legislation. And if we can't get to a full voucher entitlement, we should be pushing for as big an expansion as we possibly can. These are changes that could make a huge difference for a lot of people. They would do more than any other policy change to reduce homelessness and housing instability and overcrowding. It would do a great deal to reduce poverty and racial inequity as well. So just to cite one study on this, a study from Columbia University estimated that if everyone who was eligible for a voucher got one, that would lift 9.3 million people out of poverty. It would reduce child poverty by 1/3. It would reduce the gap in poverty rates between Black and white households by more than 1/3. So these are big transformational changes, and this is a really just crucially important proposal to push for. The last thing I'd say about this is that in addition to meeting all these pressing unmet needs, another important reason to push for major voucher expansion is to better prepare us for future crises. So I know that many people on this call have spent the last year pushing for an more adequate response to the crisis, the housing crisis that came out of the pandemic and downturn. And I think it's important to emphasize how different this past year would have played out if we had started it with a universal or close to universal voucher program in place that would have helped many more people to afford safe, adequate housing, that would have been able to expand quickly to meet growing needs. So this is also about preparing us to be able to respond more promptly and more humanely the next time there's a crisis, in addition to helping to meet pressing unmet needs right now. So I'll close with that. Thanks again for having me on, and I'll look forward to answering questions when the time comes for that.
Great, thanks so much, Will. And there's lots of questions coming in via the Q&A and the chat box. So Will, I'll invite you and our other speakers to respond as you can. I'm not sure we'll be able to get to too many questions during today's call, but just to tell everybody that this is the start of a conversation, not the end of a conversation. So we'll have many more opportunities to talk and hear from Will and other partners about the specifics of how we achieve this and why it's so important. So thanks, Will. I'm going to turn now to the second set of solutions, which is expanding and preserving the supply of affordable housing. And I'll turn first to Seth Embry, who's a policy analyst with the FADA, the Public Housing Authorities Directors Association, to talk about the urgent need to recapitalize public housing. So Seth, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks for joining.
Yes, thanks for having me. Very excited about the campaign and the pillars of the campaign. So FADA is the Public Housing Authorities Directors Association, which means that we are an organization in DC that represents approximately 1,900 executive directors of public housing agencies all across the country, large communities, small communities, rural, urban, suburban, you name it, large and small, I said. And that's important as it relates to what I'm talking about, which is public housing. So some, of our members have, thousands and thousands of units. Some have a few hundred or even fewer units. But the one thing that I want to get across as I talk about public housing as a resource and the importance of investing in public housing is that there are right now almost 2 million Americans living in public housing. And so the federal government has a moral obligation to invest in public housing to protect the health and safety of each and every one of those households. Unfortunately, the government's fallen short. So the capital fund backlog has been growing and growing and growing. Every dollar of growth means fewer units, means degradation in quality of units, and that this national resource, this important national resource, is threatened. Conversely, every dollar of capital investment sparks a series of benefits such as improved unit quality and quantity, and even operating efficiencies, which we won't talk too much about today, but it's important also to understand. So additionally, capital investments in public housing will help stimulate local economies, help respond to the COVID-19 crisis, address racial inequities, and counter climate change. And I'll talk briefly on those points. Cities and towns across the country, seniors, disabled folks, veterans, families, lots of people, lots of different types of households depend on public housing. In some communities, public housing is one of the very few types of affordable housing, and it's even more crucial in those communities. The rate of deterioration of public housing outpaces the rate of investment in public housing. And the amount needed to address annual accrual needs, which is just year over year, things break, things need upgrades such as roofs or boilers, elevators, that kind of stuff, windows and doors. And the accrual needs far outpace the investment. So a report estimated about $3.4 billion in annual accrual needs, and federal appropriations every year since that report was published, even before that, federal investment has always been less than the accrual need. There have been some relatively modest increases in the last several years. However, public housing capital funding now is about where it was 18 years ago, even before adjusting for inflation. So my first point is about economic recovery. Investing in public housing infrastructure improves the quality of life for families, yes, but it also creates jobs and acts as a regional economic generator. The industry's analysis of the $4 billion in capital funding from the 2009 Recovery Act showed that for each dollar spent, there was 2012 cents generated in regional economic activity. The GAO found that 26 jobs were created for every $1 million spent, and that $4 billion created $12.5 billion in national economic activity. So the economic benefits are clear. In terms of responding to the pandemic, investing now in public housing will help PHAs return vacant or otherwise offline units to occupancy. And that will allow housing authorities to quickly address the health and safety needs of many lower income families, and those resources, investment in the capital fund, will be critical through a protracted economic recovery period, even after the pandemic ends. In terms of racial inequity, half of all households assisted in public housing program are minorities, and this population has suffered disproportionately from the substandard condition of much public housing. Making capital funding a priority will help address the disparate impact of deteriorated public housing on communities of color, which includes reducing health risks, including lead-based paint, mold, algae triggers, and the resulting health problems such as asthma, lead poisoning, heart disease, and neurological disorders. The last point I want to touch on is climate change. So investing in public housing infrastructure would help address key areas related to climate change through reduced consumption of fossil fuels achieved by a variety of measures. More efficient heating, water, and lighting systems, enhanced thermal barriers and building envelopes, increased utilization of non-carbon energy sources, including thermal, geothermal, wind, and energy efficient appliances, and sustainability design features that mitigate damage caused by extreme weather. One thing to remember is just as homeowners and renters are in the private market are subject to damage from storms such as we saw in Texas and other places across the South, Louisiana and Oklahoma recently, public housing agencies are no different. Public housing residents and public housing properties are subject to the same impacts of climate change and extreme weather as all other kinds of housing. So in closing, we're grateful for all champions, residents, advocates, and particularly elected representatives. We saw Chair Waters talk about her efforts and the committee's efforts to invest in public housing. The Housing as Infrastructure Act was referenced earlier, but there's also a host of other legislative efforts that we support and that would improve the quality and quantity of units, including a bill to eliminate the Faircloth Amendment, which restricts housing, restricts the number of units that can be assisted through public housing. And so with that, I'll turn it back over to you, Diane.
Great, thanks so much, Seth. I really appreciate that overview, appreciate your leadership and the leadership of FADA in ensuring that we get resources to preserve and build more public housing. So just to reiterate what we've heard so far, and there's been some questions coming in. So the HoUSed campaign, we will be pushing for universal housing vouchers. And yes, we will also work to get improvements and reforms to the program and to the way our housing market works to ensure that it works better for Black, Indigenous, and people of color. So primarily we will be pushing for source of income discrimination protections, small area FMRs, and more. So if you look at our fact sheet on the Achieving Universal Rental Assistance, you'll see the whole set of additional program improvements and reforms and improvements to our housing system that we will be advocating for, along with universal housing vouchers. On the supply side, as Seth said, we are going to be pushing for at least $70 billion in funding for public housing capital repairs. We will advocate to eliminate the Faircloth Amendment and a number of other accompanying policy reforms that you can see on our fact sheet on increasing supply. Also, when it comes to increasing supply, we are going to push for at least $40 billion a year for the National Housing Trust Fund to build more apartments that are affordable to the lowest income people. And to talk a little bit about that solution and how we achieve it, I'm going to turn to Donald Whitehead from the National Coalition for the Homeless, who I'm so glad to welcome on the call. Donald, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you so much for, as Chairman Waters said, your continued leadership on the issue and the leadership from the National Low Income Housing Coalition. Good afternoon, everyone who's listening today. I'm Donald Whitehead. I am the Executive Director of the National Coalition for the Homeless. The National Coalition for the Homeless is the oldest advocacy group that works with and on behalf of people experiencing homelessness in America. And we are pleased and honored to partner with the National Low Income Housing Coalition and the other national groups on the HoUSed campaign. NCH has a long history of working with the National Low Income Housing Coalition, most notably the major campaign to enact the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund campaign from 2000 to 2008. We also included the National Housing Trust campaign in the Bring America Home Act, which was introduced in 2003. Last week, we learned some troubling news. The Department of Housing and Urban Development released their AHAR report. And whether you agree with, whether you think the numbers are completely accurate is not the question. But what we found out is that the number of homeless people in this country during a point in time count last year, in January of 2020, we saw an increase of homelessness. And we've now seen an increase of homelessness for 4 consecutive years. The increase was due to a large increase in both outdoor homelessness, 7%, and the increase in the number of chronically homeless people, 15%. There was a static in the number, a static growth in the number of veterans that were homeless. Families grew last year. The only population that saw a decrease was that of the youth population. In fact, in this report, we saw for one of the first times that the number of people who were outdoor homeless outnumbered the number of people that were homeless inside. And we continue to see the disproportionate amounts of people of color, especially African Americans and Native Americans. We see that number grow. What I'll say to you today is we must do much better. And we know that we've always had homelessness in this country. Our current period started in the late 70s and early 80s, and it has continued. It's the longest period of continued homelessness in our history in this country. And as you've previously heard, there's a shortage of 7 million rental homes affordable and available to extremely low-income people whose incomes are at or below the guidelines, which is 30% of median income. Only 40 available rental home units exist for every 100 extremely low-income households, and extremely low-income renters face shortages in every state. Among the largest 50 metropolitan areas in the United States, the supply ranges from 16 affordable and available units for every 100 people to Las Vegas, where it's 50. So they're fixing the chronic shortage of affordable housing for the lowest income renters requires long-term commitments. A significant and sustained federal housing programs that are targeted to meet the affordability needs of the lowest income Americans. And I do stress that those programs need to meet the needs of the lowest income Americans in this country. Affordable housing has many meanings, as we know, across the country, but we are talking about people at the very bottom of the economic ladder. And there is a program that is able to produce housing in a way that is unique in this country, and that's the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund. It was established in 2008, and it's intended to serve as a permanent federal program for increasing and preserving the supply of rental housing for extremely low and very low income families. The HoUSed campaign seeks to secure additional dedicated funding source for the National Affordable Housing Trust Fund to finance the production, rehabilitation, and preservation of affordable housing units for low and very low income people. The Housing Trust Fund is the right vehicle at the right time. By law, 90% of the Housing Trust Fund dollars must be used for production, preservation, rehabilitation, or operation of affordable rental housing. And up to 10% may be used to support home ownership. And we know home ownership is the vehicle for obtaining wealth in this country. And we do need to create permanent housing units that are home ownership units as well. By law, 75% of the Housing Trust Fund dollars must be used to support rental housing that serves extremely low income renters. And we can't stress that more. This housing would be for extremely low income renters. And because the Housing Trust Fund is funded outside of the appropriations process, unlike some of the other interventions, it has no cost to the federal government. The other issue that I must stress is that the trust fund allows for local control over the development of that housing. These are all very, very key provisions of the Housing Trust Fund, and it is so important that we work to enact those now. And I'll close now by saying this. This campaign supports probably the absolute best vehicle to create housing in this country. And we need to make sure that any infrastructure bill, any tax reform, any housing finance reform, or any legislative avenue includes additional funding for the Housing Trust Fund. This campaign will provide us with the opportunity to once again join forces to hold our elected officials accountable. Congresswoman Waters said, we have to show up and we have to be tough, and I agree. Let's be active, let's be tough, and let's end homelessness now. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Donald. I really appreciate your leadership and your partnership. Thank you for joining the call and for talking about the need for us to achieve at least $40 billion a year in funding for the National Housing Trust Fund. I'm going to turn now to our third set of policy solutions. So again, the first is universal housing vouchers. The second is preserve and expand supply of homes affordable to lowest income people. And the third is a permanent emergency rental assistance, a national housing stabilization fund. And to talk about that, I'm going to turn to my colleague and friend, Nan Roman from the National Alliance to End Homelessness. Nan, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Diane. I'm Nan Roman, president of the National Alliance to End Homelessness here in Washington, D.C. As I hope you know, some of you know at least, the Alliance is a national research, advocacy, and capacity building organization that uses evidence-based solutions to end homelessness. And while housing isn't the only such solution, it is true that housing affordability is the driver of homelessness, and that someone who is housed is not homeless. And just to note that since historic and systemic racism have had such an impact on housing, they have therefore also had a tremendous impact on homelessness, and those experiencing it are disproportionately people of color. On behalf of the Alliance, I just want to say how excited we are to be here today to join in the kickoff of this incredibly important campaign. It feels really great to be where we are right now on housing and homelessness in the country, with tremendous energy and knowledge coming from the administration and Congress, and the wonderful coalition that the National Income Housing Coalition has pulled together to advance the most significant housing and housing justice resources and agenda in decades, where we've come a long way in a short period of time. I'm particularly pleased about the Housing Stabilization Fund that is included in this agenda. You know, many people can basically afford their housing, but they're living on the edge, literally paycheck to paycheck income-wise. Any crisis, small or large, the car breaks down, they can't work for a week because a child is ill, it's a bad winter and they get a high utility bill, anything can be enough to push them over the edge and result in them losing their housing. And this has wide-ranging and often dire consequences. If people are evicted, as you well know, if people are evicted, their record as a tenant is impaired and it's harder to find a new place to live, not to mention the cost to them of doing that. Having to move may cause them to lose their job. Their kids may have to change school. And for many, losing their housing or being evicted is the beginning of a downward spiral that ends up resulting in homelessness. If people do become homeless, it gets harder and harder, almost by the day, literally, for them to get back into housing. And failing to do so is worse for their health, worse for their children's performance in school, much worse for their hopes of keeping a job. It's just not good. Often, it is only a small amount of money that's needed to avoid that eviction. In the homelessness field, it's often said that something as small as a bag of groceries can be the tipping point that results in someone being unable to or failing to pay the rent and getting evicted. And of course, there's not only the human cost, but the economic cost of that as well. Compared to helping someone avert the loss of their home, getting evicted or becoming homeless can cost more, a lot more. An average family stay in shelter, for example, is $16,000. Very often, only a few $100s and maybe a little case management would avert the human, economic, and social costs of eviction, instability, and homelessness. Unfortunately, smaller amounts of flexible funding like that are often very hard to come by. And this is why I am so excited about the stabilization fund idea. I know too that this proposal has bipartisan legs and as a progressive and practical intervention has great promise of passing in Congress. To this end, the campaign is emphatically asking Congress to enact the Eviction Crisis Act, introduced on a bipartisan basis by Senators Bennett, a Democrat from Colorado, and Portman, a Republican from Ohio. The bill will create a national housing stabilization fund that can provide short-term emergency assistance to low-income renters to help them avoid these all too frequent and dire consequences and remain stably housed. It will reduce both evictions and homelessness. Together with universal rental assistance, capital to increase the supply of affordable homes, and tenant protections, this is a step that's needed. It's the missing piece to ensure that all American households are safely and stably housed. I urge you to join in the campaign to ensure that these key programs and protections are in place. I can promise you that the National Alliance to End Homelessness will be an enthusiastic and determined partner with the coalition and all of you on the call to achieve these goals. Thank you, Diane, so much for inviting me to join you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Nan. I really appreciate your leadership and your partnership in the work. And thank you for joining today. So before we turn now to our fourth and final set of solutions around robust renter protections, I want to introduce another special guest, which is Congressman Ritchie Torres from New York. And I'm so pleased to have Congressman Torres with us. He is new to Congress, but he is certainly not new to affordable housing issues. He's been working to fight for public housing residents and affordable housing solutions for many years. Congressman Torres grew up in public housing in the East Bronx, and he has been a lifelong champion for affordable housing and renters. Before he was elected to Congress, he served as a New York City council member, and he chaired the Committee on Public Housing. Today, he represents the 15th District of New York, which covers most of the South Bronx, and he serves on the House Financial Services Committee and its subcommittee on housing. And I'm so pleased, Congressman Torres, to have you join us here today. Thank you for joining, and I'll turn it over to you for your remarks.
Well, it's an honor to be here. Affordable housing is the reason I ran for the city council at age 24. It's the reason I ran for Congress. It's my raison d'etre. And so I want to thank you. I want to thank the National Low-Income Housing Coalition and all of your partners for having the courage to imagine a society where every individual is guaranteed a right to housing, just like every individual is guaranteed a right to an education. None of us can survive and thrive without a home. And so I look forward to advancing the cause of affordable housing. It's deeply personal to me because I would not be where I am today were it not for affordable housing, public housing in particular, and the stability that it gave me and my family. Despite whatever challenges I had to face growing up, from poverty and substance abuse and mental illness, the one constant that I had in my life was a stable, permanent home that I could afford. And I had the reassurance of knowing that home was a safety net for my family and me. The challenges we face are huge. There are more than 10 million Americans who pay more than half their income toward their rent and who live in danger of eviction. There are children who are growing up in the wealthiest country in the world who have never known life outside of shelter. And we know both as people and as policymakers that the solution to homelessness is housing. And we as a society have the wealth and the wherewithal to create housing. What has been lacking historically is the political will. And I am more optimistic than I've ever been because there's a widespread recognition of housing as infrastructure and housing as a human right. And we are living in the midst of an FDR moment, a Democratic president and a Democratic House and a Democratic Senate. And we have a president who's willing to govern boldly. So I feel like we have a historic opportunity to create and preserve and green affordable housing on a scale that we've never seen before, and on a scale that will have a real impact in confronting the affordability crisis. What we need is greater subsidy. We need greater federal subsidy for housing bonds and housing credits and housing vouchers. We need vouchers for all so that no family in need pays more than 30% of their income toward their rent. But we also need greater housing supply. We need to enforce the letter and the spirit of the Fair Housing Act and confront exclusionary zoning, which has been a root cause of systemic racism in our society. And finally, we have to protect tenants from harassment and arbitrary eviction, protect them from displacement and speculation and gentrification. So greater subsidy, greater supply, tenant protection. We as activists and as policymakers, we have the benefit of an FDR moment. And we owe it to ourselves and we owe it to the people we love to harness the power of this moment to make real the vision of housing as a human right. And I look forward to being a partner in that struggle with each and every one of you. And thank you for having me.
Thank you so much, Congressman Torres. We're so thrilled to have you in Congress and bringing your deep expertise and passion for improvements to public housing and broader affordable housing reforms in Congress, on the committee, and on the subcommittee on housing. And can you talk a little bit about priorities in the infrastructure spending package? I mean, you just ran through them pretty well, but anything more you want to say about amounts that you think we can achieve in the infrastructure package, and anything more you think we as a community of advocates and organizers and impacted people can do to help get it done?
Well, I would take nothing for granted. I would keep agitating, but it seems likely that we will have a second reconciliation bill centered around infrastructure. And because of the advocacy of you, and especially Chair Waters in the House of Representatives, housing is going to figure prominently in whatever infrastructure package we ultimately pass. And I'm optimistic that we will secure tens of billions of dollars in new funding to address the overwhelming capital need in public housing, in particular the New York City Housing Authority. Hundreds of billions of dollars, hopefully, to create, preserve, and green affordable housing. The leading cause of greenhouse gas emissions in cities are buildings. And so there's an opportunity to kill two birds with one stone, to make America more affordable and more sustainable at the same time. And whether it will happen in an infrastructure package, I don't know, but I certainly want to champion the cause of housing vouchers for all, because it is, for me, the most elegant solution to the affordability crisis. A common criticism that I hear in my neck of the woods is that much of the affordable housing we create is unaffordable to the poorest Americans. And that problem would be simply solved by a universal housing voucher program. But we also have to ensure that there's robust enforcement against source of income discrimination, which is prevalent. Even in New York City, even though it's technically against the law, there continues to be an epidemic of discrimination based on source of income.
Absolutely, couldn't agree more. You just laid out the agenda for our campaign. So we are behind you all the way, and any times and any ways that we can be helpful to your efforts to lead these solutions and push them forward, we will be there. So thank you again so much for your leadership and for your partnership and for joining the call today.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you. So I'm going to turn now to Diane Enriquez from the Center for Popular Democracy. And she's the Opportunity Campaign Director there. And she's going to talk about the fourth set of solutions, which are essential to our success in this campaign, which are robust, strengthened, enforced renter protections. So Diane, I'll turn it over to you. Thanks so much for joining.
Thank you so much for having me, and hello to all of you. I'm super excited to be speaking with you all and to be a part of this exciting moment. So I'm with the Center for Popular Democracy, and we are a network of community grassroots organizations that are multi-issue organizing hubs in about 34 states, Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C. So we have about 53 affiliates total. And we've been working on housing for a number of years, like all of you. And I'm sure you all know, but let me just lay out some statistics. Roughly about 23 million renter households have lost employment income since March of 2020, and millions owe rental debt that puts them at risk of eviction. In December 2020, Moody's Analytics estimated that nearly 12 million renter households would owe an average of $5,850 in back rent and utilities by January. So this amounts to as much as $70 billion in unpaid debt. Even before the pandemic, however, 8 out of 10 low-income renter households and about half of all renters were already forced to pay too much for housing. Most of them were categorically rent burdened. And so for us at the Center for Popular Democracy, in an effort to counter displacement and address housing inequality, us and our affiliates have been working and organizing to strengthen and expand tenant protections and hold corporate landlords accountable. And today we're very excited to partner with the National Low Income Housing Coalition and other allies to advance some key tenant protections that we all know will work to ensure that families have a home to thrive. Some of these priorities include policies to prohibit source of income discrimination, to ensure that landlords do not discriminate against renters with rental assistance and other sources of income. We want to establish anti-rent gouging protections for renters and require landlords to disclose any and all fees in advance of lease signing. We want policies to discourage speculators from driving up housing costs. We want to establish and fund a national right to counsel to help more renters stay in their homes and mitigate harm when eviction is unavoidable. And we want to create a just cause eviction protection to ensure greater housing stability and prevent arbitrary and harmful actions by landlords. We believe that that universal tenant protections at the federal, state, and local levels will keep those 40 million tenants estimated to be at risk of evictions in their homes. And we all know that the time for the federal government to act is now. And we're really excited to work with you all to make these and other priorities a reality. So thank you so much for your time.
Fantastic. Thank you so much, Diane. We're excited too about the partnership and the work ahead, and really appreciate you joining today's call. Thank you. So again, I hope you're all, I know it's hard maybe to keep track of some of the links that are in the chat box, but we have fact sheets and full information on all of these priorities. And of course, much more to come. This is just the first introduction to some of them. We'll be talking about them for the weeks and months to come. And in addition to many of the really powerful national partners like those you just heard from and beyond, who we will continue to hear from in the weeks and months to come, we're also very fortunate to work on this campaign with powerful and effective statewide housing organizations throughout the country. So the National Income Housing Coalition, we have 64 state partners in 42 states. And thanks to some generous foundation support, we're able to support many of them to increase their capacity to do this work of federal advocacy with us. And so for this campaign, we're partnering with organizations, many of whom are in states that are represented by members of Congress who are key to our success, such as West Virginia, California, New York, Virginia, Montana, Ohio, Nevada, Pennsylvania, Georgia, and beyond. So today we're going to hear from a few of our state partners about their work on the long-term solutions of the HoUSed campaign. And I'm going to start by asking David Zisser from Housing California to talk a little bit about his organization and about their work on the HoUSed campaign. David, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Diane. And thanks so much for having me here today. I'm David Zisser. I'm the Associate Director at Housing California. We are, let's see if I can, there we go. We're really grateful that NLIHC has invited Housing California to be a partner in this very bold campaign. We're very excited about it. I wanted to say a few words first about Housing California. If I can, I'm having trouble with the slides. If somebody on the back end wants to help me with my slides and just go to the second slide, that would be awesome. There you go. So I just want to say a quick word about Housing California. As one of the leading housing and homelessness organizations in California, we are committed to creating a more just and inclusive state. We advance our mission through 3 strategic directions: shaping a new housing and homelessness narrative, building and shifting power, and advancing systems change. We really think of ourselves as having 2 key superpowers. It's how we like to think about it. First, we are visionary. We think big and bold. We know that the housing challenges we face require solutions at scale, which sounds a lot like another organization I know, and it's one reason we love partnering with the coalition. And second, we are the big tent in California. We work on affordable housing and homelessness. We partner on tenants' rights. We work with resident leaders, homeless service providers, affordable housing developers, and we work across sectors from education to transportation to the environment and labor. That also sounds familiar, I know. And I'm excited to talk about a major initiative that draws on these strengths and that Housing California is co-leading with the California Housing Partnership. It's called the Roadmap Home 2030, and we intend to draw through lines between the 2 campaigns, HoUSed and the Roadmap, and to leverage the Roadmap to advance the HoUSed campaign's national priorities. See if I can get this working. There we go. The Roadmap Home 2030 is a comprehensive framework of equity-centered, evidence-based policy solutions that, if fully implemented, would end homelessness and create stable, affordable homes and thriving communities for all Californians. The Roadmap asks and answers, what would it take to meet the full scale of the need? The Roadmap lays out 4 goals: create 1.2 million affordable homes over the next 10 years, protect more than 1 million low-income renter households, end homelessness, and close racial equity gaps in housing and homelessness. Like I said, we're bold. The Roadmap includes an equity-centered framework that holds 57 evidence-based solutions that will collectively create the systems change and structural reforms we need to bring all Californians home. The framework has 5 prongs: invest in our values to prioritize those most impacted at scale, restructure our tax and finance systems to be more equitable and to generate the revenue our state needs, reimagine growth by transforming how we use land to create affordable homes in all communities, including opportunity-rich areas that have excluded Black, Latinx, Indigenous, and other people of color, protect people from discrimination and from losing their homes, and create a more efficient and accountable housing and homelessness system through clear leadership, streamlined processes, and seamless coordination. In addition to meeting the goals, implementing the Roadmap would have other impacts, including tens of thousands of new home ownership opportunities, preserving nearly 150,000 affordable homes, creating 500,000 market rate homes, creating hundreds of thousands of jobs, and generating billions of dollars in income and taxes. The Roadmap Home represents a diverse statewide coalition of advocates and experts. The California Budget and Policy Center has been a critical partner on policy development and research. Our policy advisory committee includes around 30 organizations that represent the full breadth of the housing justice movement in California, as well as a number of multi-sector partners. And now to the best part. Our success at the state level, the success of the Roadmap, is inextricably linked to successfully advancing strong federal policy and systems change solutions. The coalition's campaign goals and the Roadmap Homes priorities line up beautifully. For example, the Roadmap Homes federal sidebar includes making housing choice vouchers an entitlement for eligible low-income households, creating an emergency rental assistance program during times of crisis like a pandemic, and increasing access to tax credits and funding for HUD programs. Increasing affordable housing supply and expanding renter protections are key pillars of the Roadmap Home and include many of the same strategies at the state level, like right to counsel, rent cap, just cause eviction protections. easily facilitating through lines in messaging and advocacy. I'll be quick here. The timing to bring these two campaigns together is also perfect. We're launching the Roadmap Home campaign, a campaign Housing California will be leading this Thursday. And you can register by going to roadmaphome.ca.org/launch. I mentioned our 3 strategic directions earlier, and that's how we think about the strategies we'll use to advance the campaign, both the House campaign and the Roadmap Home. This includes using exciting narrative research at the regional, state, and national level to make the case for long-term game-changing solutions and applying a robust communication strategy. It means strengthening our resident leadership to center those with lived expertise while expanding our base to provide air cover to our leaders on the ground and growing our multi-sector partnerships. At our conference in June, which is one of the biggest events in the country for housing and homelessness, we plan on having a session focused on federal priorities and centering the House campaign in that discussion. And finally, we plan to strengthen and expand our relationships with California's congressional leaders so that we can effectively advocate for these solutions, so that we can have more Maxine Waters out there in the Capitol. That's it. I really want to thank the National Low Income Housing Coalition. This is the right moment to be bold. We're excited to be part of this campaign and to leverage the roadmap to push it as far as we can. Thank you.
Great, thanks so much, David. We're excited to support the Roadmap Home and so glad to have your involvement in the House campaign. Thanks so much for joining today.
You got it, thank you.
I'm going to turn now to another key state partner and also a member of the National Low Income Housing Coalition's board, Bambi Hayes-Brown, who is the CEO of Georgia ACT. Bambi, I'll turn it over to you. Thank you so much for joining today.
Thank you so much, and I will be brief. I'm Dr. Bambi Hayes-Brown, President and CEO of Georgia Advancing Communities Together, also known as Georgia ACT, and we are a 68-member statewide nonprofit affordable housing and community development membership organization. And our mission is to build, support, and inform a statewide network of thriving organizations, professionals, and individuals in advancing equitable housing and community development. And our mission is for all Georgia families to have decent, safe housing in vibrant neighborhoods. And we do this work through our 3-pronged strategy, and that is ACT Connect, ACT Advocacy, and ACT Capacity. And I will leave my information in the chat if you would like to talk more about those initiatives. I won't go over talking about all the issues. I want to talk about some of our mobilization strategies for this new initiative. Georgia ACT, we were a partner with the National Low Income Housing Coalition in the Our Homes, Our Votes campaign. And we did voter engagement with numerous partners throughout the state of Georgia, not just housers, but also social justice organizations such as NAACP branches that have housing committees. So that is a group that I encourage housers to get involved with because they do have housing committees that advance racial and equity work as it relates to housing. And we also did a small rental assistance program where we provided rental assistance and utility assistance to 137 families and households in the state of Georgia. And after we completed our Homes, Our Votes campaign, we were awarded funding from an anonymous donor to do additional voter engagement work for the Georgia U.S. Senate runoff race, where we partnered with other nonprofits, including Fresh Communities, Black Voters Matter, Sowega Rising, and others. And we touched over 10,000 households and individuals and families in 66 rural Georgia counties, 5 central Georgia counties, and we worked primarily in 3 metro Atlanta, Georgia counties, including Fulton, DeKalb, and Clayton. And so some of the lessons learned that we're going to use for our federal engagement include a get on the bus tour, similar to what we did when we did our voter engagement, where we're going to travel around the state and have leaders, local leaders that are on the ground that are going to help mobilize those individuals, especially those individuals with lived experience like me who have experienced homelessness, individuals who have lived in public housing. So we want to get them mobilized and provide them with the tools that they need to get in touch with their legislators, not only the Democratic legislators, but also the Republican legislators and also our senators, so that they can be involved and get that message across and advocate for those four bucket areas under the HoUSed campaign. We're also going to start a lived experience leadership program, and this program will consist of anywhere from 10 to 20 leaders statewide that will be trained on policy and advocacy, that will be trained on messaging, and will be trained on mobilization, and that we will have those graduates of that program to become ambassadors of this work to help mobilize and gain more access to individuals on the grassroots level, working with those trusted partners such as faith-based institutions and faith-based leaders to engage in working with our with the communities to get the message out to the legislators about these four bucket areas. We're also going to implement a poverty simulation for affordable housing. This was something that we did on the state level with Georgia Act at one of our membership meetings. And we got this idea from Family Connections. And Family Connections, if you have a Family Connections Coalition in your state, please reach out to them. They had a poverty simulation, but I tweaked that just a bit, just so it fits affordable housing. So we're going to implement this for our elected officials, because we can talk all day, but until they actually get a simulation to what it feels like to not have run out of money before the end of the month, not being able to find affordable housing, to have those doors slammed in your face, to wait 10 years on those waiting lists. We're going to take those legislators through an actual simulation of what it is to go through these different housing mechanisms and go through these housing challenges so they can experience that in a real life situation. And so in addition, we're going to have our Twitter storms. We're going to go out on social media. We're going to have our sign-on letters, but we've also engaging our Georgia State Chamber of Commerce, because we want to get the business community involved in this also. I also hold a Georgia real estate broker's license, so we've already began talking to our realtors, because we have to get these landlords involved and we have to educate them on the benefits of programs such as the voucher program. I used to work for a local housing authority, and I saw all the time the misconceptions about the housing choice voucher programs and housing choice voucher families. And so, we have to get out of this not in my backyard, and that is in Black communities, white communities, all the above. I have seen that not in my backyard attitude in Black communities as well. So we don't talk a lot about the classism that goes along with the racism when we're talking about equity in this work. So we want to bring all of them on board and engage them and show them the importance of housing that is affordable for everyone. Especially for our business community, because when you have employees that can't find housing that they can afford, that's close to their employment centers, they have to travel further. And then if you're in those rural areas where there is no transportation, then that brings a challenge to our business community as well. So I'll put my information in the chat and be glad to follow up with any questions that you may have. Thank you so much, Diane.
Thank you so much, Bambi. You do such incredible, impactful, important work in the state of Georgia, and we're so excited to have you on the National Income Housing Coalition's Board of Directors and as a partner in the HoUSed campaign. So thank you. Also check out the chat box. There are many people who are very excited about the work that you're doing. So thank you so much. So, and I just want to pause for a second and say thank you to the nearly 700 people who remain on this call. I really appreciate you. Please stay on. We have a few more really good, important presentations. If you're not able to stay on, remember that we're recording this call and the recording will be available soon afterwards. We'll circulate it to our network after the call so you can catch up on the rest later if you need to. So I'm going to turn now to Lauren Frederick, who is the Policy Development Officer with the West Virginia Coalition to End Homelessness, another one of our state partners. Lauren, thanks so much for joining, and I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Lauren Frederick, and as I was already introduced as the Policy Development Officer with the West Virginia Coalition to End Homelessness, and I would like to thank the National Low Income Housing Coalition for inviting us to join the campaign. So it is the goal of the coalition to design a program. When I say coalition, I got to remember our state coalition to design a program that encompasses everything that we've talked about today, which will target federal advocacy with the goal of improving access to universal housing vouchers, increasing supply, expanding renter protections, and promoting zoning reform. This work will also allow us to take some time to really target statewide advocacy and build those strong local partnerships that we know are so important, because as we know, if we can have the best bill passed at the federal level, but as it funnels down through a conservative state, then you sometimes get it watered down so much that it's not really what we intended it to be in the first place. All right, so I looked over and I have two screens up and I saw that my slides are already up. Well, thank you. So basically under the first piece that we are kind of targeting under federal advocacy, we will work to advance our existing advocacy efforts at the federal level to push policy reform and increase funding allocations, as we talked about, to the Housing Trust Fund to bolster the development of infrastructure in rural communities across the nation. This will lay the groundwork for inclusive, equitable, and accessible housing resources through universal housing vouchers. I think it's important also to note here that in rural communities, it's not only about affordability, but also important to talk about the habitability of units, because we have vouchers, but we don't have habitable units for folks to utilize them in. That's crucial in the southern part of our state because it's hard to find habitable units. So I was so excited to hear about housing as infrastructure, because that's key to everything that we're doing. Also, as we know, other mainstream systems must be strong in order for this important work to be carried out. This is why it is important to support the coordination of federal agencies to provide a robust supportive services programs to assist with long-term housing sustainability. So thinking as housing as the foundation, but also strong school systems, access to healthcare, behavioral health services, and childcare. All right, next slide, please. And then we're talking about statewide implementation. So we all on the call, I feel, know is important in this important work to push for state and local partnerships who can inform the process, share information, and support accountability. It is also important to enhance our existing partnerships with our West Virginia public housing authorities and to advocate to reduce barriers to housing, such as criminal background, and also continue to increase the supply of our housing choice vouchers and also the population-specific vouchers like FUP, FYI, and our 811 mainstream vouchers. I just want to take I know we're running out of time, but I think this is the time right now, like we've talked about in the call, to really think about what would a housing choice voucher program or a public housing program look like with a robust supportive services. So we have our FSS programs that are crucial, but also really bringing in that connection to community and providing that support to prevent eviction. So, and then also strengthening collaboration with our Housing Development Fund, because historically in West Virginia, ours has primarily done more hard cost projects, but we've been working with them on the ERA funds, and we're hoping to work with them to develop a robust TBRA program. Also educating local magistrates on federal and state tenant rights and fair housing laws, because these are the folks that are making the decisions and sometimes uneducated decisions on whether somebody is going to be evicted or not. So we really want to take this time to focus on our magistrates and also increasing renters' access to counsel through collaboration with our legal aid and Mountain State Justice. And last but not least, focusing engagement efforts with our community planning and development authorities and our local governments with the greatest need for housing development and advocate to promote zoning reform. I think it's also really just quick to point out, I know this is happening in cities where people are buying up rental properties and making them into Airbnbs, but it's also happening here in West Virginia in our ski resort areas. So it's really just pushing low-income renters out of these communities. And I just think that's important to note here. And the next slide, I know because we're running short on time, that's why I put it at the end. Just real quick, we are the state advocacy body for preventing and ending homelessness in West Virginia. We are also the Balance of State COC lead, and we are a direct service provider, which provides us a unique and crucial opportunity to really identify what's going on the ground, because we have staff on the ground that helps us inform our policy decisions. And then the next is my contact. I went as fast as I could.
You did great, and you did a great job of sharing all of the good and important work that you're doing in West Virginia. Thank you so much for your partnership. We're really excited about the work you're doing in the state, and we're excited to partner with you on the national campaign. So thanks so much for joining.
Thank you.
Now I'm going to turn to Sarah Sadian, who's Vice President of Public Policy at the Coalition, to talk about some of the immediate legislative opportunities we have to advance the campaign's policy priorities. I think one of the most exciting things about this campaign is not only that the policies that we are working to advance are so ambitious, but that we have such an incredible and real opportunity to achieve many of them soon. So I'll turn it over to Sarah to talk about how we do that.
Great. Thank you so much, Diane. So exciting to hear from everyone else on the call today about all of the solutions that are needed, laying out that vision. We do have an opportunity right now to help achieve that bold vision, and it starts with the American Recovery Plan Act. This is a bill that Congress and the White House will be putting together over the next few months, and it represents a real opportunity to achieve a lot of what we're talking about on today's call. So first, I want to share, what do we know about this legislative opportunity? What's the timeline for enactment? Well, congressional leaders and President Biden are currently working on a framework for the bill, which is intended to invest in America, create good paying jobs, combat the climate crisis, advance racial equity, and build back better, all very ambitious goals that can be furthered by including the HoUSed priority campaigns. The White House is working on this proposal right now. It could cost somewhere around $3 trillion, which is enormous and a really potential resource for housing. There are reports, as Chairwoman Maxine Waters mentioned, that the White House proposal could include something like $200 billion that would be used for housing infrastructure, including $100 billion to expand the supply of low-income residents, housing for low-income residents. We're trying to dig into that more so we have a better understanding of what the administration will be pushing for. But I will say that if Biden includes this housing proposal in the infrastructure outline, it's really going to be a testament to the great work of everyone on this call over the last several years, making the case for why housing is infrastructure. Our job going forward is to make sure that Congress keeps those investments high and that Congress really prioritizes spending in a way that's addressing the needs of people with the lowest incomes and those who are most marginalized. So we're going to share what our specific priorities are for that infrastructure bill and how we get there. So we know that there are these ongoing conversations about whether the bill will move in one bill or if it'll be broken up into several bills. A lot of that we don't know the answers to, but we are going to be closely monitoring it and finding new opportunities and talking with you guys about how to advance it. But to do any of this, there's a really good chance that Democrats are going to try to use budget reconciliation like they did under the American Rescue Act. So the budget reconciliation process is one that allows Congress to pass bills with just a simple majority in the Senate rather than the typical 60 votes. It's really the only path forward if Democrats don't think that they can get 10 Republicans on their to join them on their bill. And that seems very difficult. That's still very possible, but we'll see what happens. But even if they use budget reconciliation, there's going to be an enormous role for advocates to play in making sure that Democrats stay together to pass that bill, even though it only requires a simple majority. There are some other limitations, though, with budget reconciliation that are really important for our campaign to know about. It can only be used for issues related to spending or taxes, and it can't be used for other policy changes that don't have a cost associated with it. So this makes the budget reconciliation process a really great opportunity for us to advance the resources we need to expand rental assistance and to build and preserve the supply of affordable housing for people with the lowest income. So the first two pillars of our House campaign can really be best addressed through this infrastructure recovery bill. So in particular, we think there's an opportunity to advance three major solutions on the bill. One, we're going to be pushing for an expansion of rental assistance to every eligible household. I know that Will spoke about this earlier, but only 1 in 4 people who are eligible get any sort of help. This is the bill where we can expand rental assistance to every eligible household and shift funding to the mandatory side of the budget so it's guaranteed for everyone who needs it. The second piece that we'll be pushing for in this bill is an investment of $70 billion to repair public housing for current tenants and for future generations. And the third piece is to push for $40 billion in the Housing Trust Fund to build and preserve homes for people with the greatest needs. There are two ways that you can help us advance this in Congress. One is signing our national letter in support of the House campaign, which includes the full breadth of goals to advance anti-racist policies and ensure affordable, safe housing is universally available. I'm going to ask my colleague to include a link to our sign-on letter in the chat box. I hope you guys take a second to sign it. The second thing that you can do is call your members of Congress and ask them to support these priorities in an infrastructure bill. Right now, Senators Jeff Merkley, Elizabeth Warren, and Kirsten Gillibrand, as well as Congressman Ritchie Torres, who we just heard from, is circulating a Dear Colleague letter to their colleagues in Congress. That's a letter that calls for the House campaign's 3 priorities for an infrastructure bill, which was rental assistance for all families, $70 billion for public housing, and $45 billion for the Housing Trust Fund each year. So that's a great opportunity for you to be calling your senators and your representatives and asking them to sign on to that Dear Colleague letter. I think my colleagues have already shared that information about how to do that in the chat box. So I think thanks for that. Just some final thoughts. So from what we've heard, the goal is to try to pass something by this summer or this fall. And we know we have a lot of work ahead of us. Congressional leaders are already talking about the bill, making decisions. So it's really important that you're weighing in consistently with your members of Congress over the next few months. And I just want to highlight that, later this year, after Congress deals with this infrastructure bill, there's going to be other legislative opportunities to enact other pieces of the House campaign, especially those pillars of the campaign that can't be passed on an infrastructure bill. So that includes priorities around robust renter protections and the need for emergency rental assistance, resources to stabilize families in a crisis. So I just want to acknowledge that the infrastructure bill is a tremendous opportunity. We can't let it go, but it's not the only one that we're going to have this year. And as we get closer to that point, we'll share more details with you about how you can take action. So thanks, Diane. I'll turn it back to you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Sarah. Some really exciting opportunities immediately ahead. I'll talk a little bit more about the letters and how you can sign them in a moment, but I want to turn next to Jen Butler, who is the Director of Media Relations and Communications at the National Low-Income Housing Coalition, to talk a little bit about some of the communication strategies that we will use and share with you all to use to amplify the campaign. Jen, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks so much, Diane. Hello.
You're on, Jen.
Oh, okay, sorry. Good afternoon. First, allow me to echo the sentiments and thanking everyone for joining us today for our House campaign launch. I'd like to do an overview of our communication strategy to support the campaign through content creation, media outreach, and messaging. So through our curation of creative content, we're going to showcase the collective work and overall campaign in action. The creative assets that we're going to build are going to be the instruments that we use in our storytelling, messaging, and will help further mobilize our campaign goals and solutions. And by this, we mean the creation of interactive content with a specific focus on the lives of the people that this campaign serves, and also the partners and the communities behind all of this work. And this will be ongoing and an intricate part of progressing our campaign forward by sharing our achievements each step of the way. For our integrated media approach, this is how we're going to activate across all of our social media platforms and with all forms of and outlets of local and national media. Because while we're building high impact and dynamic content for the campaign in action, our engagement with media is how we're going to progress amplifying our message. So through this engagement with media, we're going to share the wins of the greater campaign and also all of the work that's being done on the localized level. We're working on building a robust media toolkit and a structured timeline that'll provide the foundation for all of our collective outreach. And we'll be circling back with both. We're also going to provide more on our overall branding of the campaign as well. We're going to work closely with each of our partners on ensuring that we have a succinct and collaborative approach for the visibility and positioning on and across all of our social media platforms, and for all of our collective efforts on securing coverage by local and national media. For our overall digital engagement, our website is our centralized hub for the campaign. So all of our messaging and engagement is going to directly point to and drive traffic to our website. And here, everything will be housed, our campaign resources, action items, and updates. So as our centralized hub, the site will be maintained with the most up-to-date news, developments, and access to all of the campaign's important information. And our digital engagement will also expand to include our larger network of our local partners and all of their platforms as well. So this then brings us to a pivotal part of our strategy, which is through our partner and external communications. That's that work with our entire network. And that's through all of our implementations. It's going to be based on the shared success of each of our participating members. And it's through our unified goals and what we share about this campaign and action that will resonate across diverse audiences and propel our mission forward. And we're going to do that by capturing our campaign through multiple lenses. And we couldn't be more excited, and we really look forward to sharing these great stories to come. So, you know, do feel free to reach out to me with any questions. And like I said, we will be circling back with a comprehensive and robust toolkit so we can really just hit the ground running. And thank you again so much for joining today.
Great, thanks very much, Jen. Terrific work, and much more to come from Jen and the full communications team to help all of you, help us amplify the campaign and advance the solutions. So thank you so much for joining. A couple next steps I just want to flag for you all. As Sarah mentioned, we have a national sign-on letter where we are urging organizations across the country to sign on in support of these policy goals and these policy solutions. And we will be sending that letter to leadership of Congress to advance these solutions. So please sign this letter yourself, circulate it with your network. The more signatures we get, the better we can show the breadth of and the depth of this campaign. So we will be sending an e-blast out tomorrow to our full network with links to this letter, and as Sarah said, to the Dear Colleague letters that we already have circulating in the House and the Senate, gathering congressional support for these solutions as well. So we're already out of the gate running with key congressional champions who are pushing with us to get these solutions enacted. If you want to hear about and talk more in depth about these policy solutions, please join a webinar that we're having on Thursday at 3 o'clock on our policy priorities. We'll share that in the chat box, and we'll share it in follow-up materials. So if you're able to and want to, you can join that webinar to hear in more depth about these policy priorities. Next week, we will not be having a national call because instead we're having NLIHC's annual, in this case, virtual forum. And I invite you all to participate in our forum. We'll be talking a lot about what we've talked about on today's call and how we achieve these kind of bold solutions and center racial equity in the work. So please join our forum next week. And then on Monday, April 5th, we will be back to our regular weekly calls on Monday afternoons with much more to come. So thank you all again. Thanks for joining and sticking with us for this expanded national call today. Thanks in advance for all of the work that I know you'll be doing with us to advance these solutions. It's a really exciting moment that we have here, and I'm excited to seize it together with all of you through the HoUSed campaign. So thank you, take care, and we'll see you all again soon.